presidential courage, meaning this idea that we have to expect our presidents not just to do what is popular, but maybe to make a human sacrifice of themselves at a crucial moment. Washington knew that everything he did as president was setting a precedent for every successor who followed him, so he was trying to tell his successors, do as I did. You know, even I was probably the most popular human being in the United States at the beginning. I was willing to give all that up for an important cause. So that's story number one. I'll skip through the others so I don't, or very briefly, so I don't talk at Hubert Humphrey length. John Adams in the late 1790s. He came to office as the president of the Federalist Party. Federalists were desperate to go to war with France. They hated the French were attacking American ships. They also, and I'm not drawing any current day parallels, they thought it would be good for their party. They'd become the National Security Party. They could say the people who were against them were treasonous and letting national security down. And John Adams was skeptical, but he got into it. And he endorsed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which allowed his Secretary of State to put any journalist in jail who wrote something against the president or the Secretary of State. And this began to accelerate. And John Adams, it turns out, was someone who was secretly rather jealous of George Washington, although he admired him. Washington had this big military reputation. Adams wanted that too. So as he began to build an army and made noises about war with France, when he gave a speech, he began wearing a military uniform with a big gleaming sword at his side. Fortunately, presidents have given that up in recent years, although some of them may have been tempted. And so this war fever really accelerated. And then suddenly, to his great credit, John Adams woke up one morning like a guy with a hangover and said, "My God, what have I done? You know, the French are attacking our ships, but they are not such a danger that we need to go to war with them." And he said something to the leaders of his party that I wish he were here 5 years ago to say to all Americans, which was, and I directly quote, he said, "Great is the guilt of an unnecessary war." He was one of those who was behind the writing of the Constitution, and he felt that it was ruinous for a democracy to go to war except when it was absolutely necessary, and he felt it wasn't. So he stood up to his party and he said, "No war with France." They said, "All right, we won't support you in 1800. They didn't, and he was defeated. And the key to it all is that it was very painful for John Adams to lose. He wanted 2 terms like George Washington. He didn't want to go back to Massachusetts, the biggest loser in the young history of the United States. But he said to himself, essentially, I wanted 2 terms. You know, I don't like to go back under a shadow, but I have other things in my life other than politics. I have my wife, Abigail, whom he loved so much, and his children, and his farm in Massachusetts, and his books and his other interests, and he lived on for 26 more years. And that's sort of a key because, you know, we were just talking about this a few minutes ago. We have to look at these candidates for president this year and next. And one question I'd suggest is, you know, think of these people. Is this someone who, if there is a moment that really requires presidential courage, is this a candidate who will say, I really want to be president and I want to hold on, I want to be popular? Or is this someone who, you know, will work hard to become president, would like to be popular, but knows that he or she is not elected to just hang on and be popular forever, may have to sacrifice that? And the lesson is, I think, from John Adams that as we're looking at candidates in our own time, take a look at these people and ask, is there something else in their lives, you know, family or friends or other interests, hopefully convictions that go beyond politics, or is this someone who just wants to be president and hang on? Because if it is, that person does not deserve your vote. Andrew Jackson, 1828, was elected after, you know, we always hear about modern campaigns being the dirtiest in history. Well, 1828, Jackson's wife, Rachel, whom he dearly loved, was vilified in handbills that said she was an adulteress and a prostitute. And she was a very sensitive woman. He shielded her from these, but just after the election, she actually accidentally saw one of these handbills, collapsed, went into a decline, and very soon died. She was literally driven to her grave by Jackson's political enemies. So when he came to Washington, Jackson was very eager to avenge her death, if you went to see him in the White House, he'd say, come into my bedroom, and you'd go in. If you were a senator he was negotiating with, and he'd say, take a look at that wall. You'd look over his fireplace, and there was a framed pistol. And Jackson would say, that's the pistol I used to kill someone who slandered my wife. It sort of focuses the mind. So with this degree of emotion, Jackson went after perhaps the main one of his political enemies, which was a banker in Philadelphia called Nicholas Biddle, who was the head of something called the Bank of the United States, which was quasi-public, had enormous power given it by Congress, and it used its money, among other things, to buy up huge numbers of senators and members of Congress, ditto with the press, editors and reporters. So it had tentacles of subterranean power that led who knew where. And Jackson, in taking it on and abolishing it, could not be sure that this bank would not use that hidden power to destroy him. It was a death struggle. In the end, thank God he won. Had he not won, he was absolutely right. This bank could have stolen our liberties, and we could all, if this country somehow survived, be working for the Bank of the United States, as essentially its serfs. Abraham Lincoln, 1864. I opened the book with a scene in the summer of 1864. Lincoln lived in a little cottage during the summers, not at the White House, about 3 miles north up the hill from the White House. He took his family there every summer for about 4 months, partly because it was cooler than the White House, and the other reason was that in those days, you may know, upstairs in the White House, the president had his offices, and they were intermingled with the family bedrooms. So he would wake up in the morning and open his bedroom door wearing his long white nightshirt and stumble over about 90 people who wanted favors out of him or jobs for their brothers-in-law and so on. So he was very eager to take his family up to this cottage for about a quarter of his presidency. But at this point in August of 1864, when I opened the Lincoln story, he was alone. His wife was gone, his children, his sons were gone, and there he faced the biggest political crisis of his life, which is that political aides to Lincoln came to him and said, Mr. Lincoln, you're running for re-election this fall against General McClellan, and you're going to lose. You're not even going to carry your home state of Illinois. And the reason, they said, is that Northern voters were willing to fight the Civil War to bring back the South into the Union, but you changed the signals. You're now saying the Civil War will not end until the slaves were freed. And they're not willing to do that, and they're going to vote against you. And the only way you might win this election is if you renounce the Emancipation Proclamation. And I should say, one big reason I got into this line of work when I was about 8, being from Illinois, my parents took me down to the Springfield sites of Abraham Lincoln, and I remember seeing the chair in which I was told Lincoln would read to his sons, and I remember asking the guide, I was 8, what did Lincoln do to his sons when they were bad? Did he spank them? And the guide was really disgusted, said, no, he just let these kids run wild through the house. It was terrible. I heard that, and Lincoln was the man for me. I began reading everything I could get my hands on Lincoln, and then later on other presidents and other history. So anyway, given the way I thought of Lincoln when I was 8, I would have assumed that, given the chance to win re-election by renouncing the Emancipation, Lincoln would have immediately said, I wouldn't do that. Of course, I will do the right thing. But as it turns out, like all these presidents I'm writing about, they were all torn between the devil on one shoulder, the angel on the other, as most human beings and most politicians are. And Lincoln rationalized it by saying, well, McClellan will be a disaster as president, so it's important that I win. But rather soon, he concluded that he couldn't do that. He couldn't be Abraham Lincoln and do something so cheap. And he essentially said to himself, even if I lose the election, my plan.
Okay. Dave, spelling of the last name first.
Hilmoe.
And it's pronounced Hilmo?
Hilmo.
Okay. Let's just basically talk about Seattle Public Utilities has an ongoing program where they're going to be actually covering the reservoirs. Why don't you tell me when that began and roughly where the program has been up until at least September 11th?
Okay. We've had open reservoirs since 1901, when Lincoln and Volunteer were put in service as part of the original Cedar development of the Cedar Supply, and continued building open reservoirs until the early 1960s. In 1994, the then version of the...
You're gonna have to bear with us. Every
Okay.
time we have a plane come over your head. So open reservoirs since 1901. Then in 94 something changed?
In 1994, the State Department of Health changed the drinking water regulations, and they said that we needed to provide them with a plan for covering all of our open reservoirs. And we had, at that point, 10. So we developed a plan, took a look at the system storage needs, developed a plan, proposed it to the Department of Health, and it was approved in early 1996. It was then roughly a 25-year program, because we realized that it was going to be costly and it was going to take us a bit of time, considering other kinds of capital investments that we were making in the system to get it completed. And so it runs out in the current plan to about 2018.
Okay. Why did the health department ask you to cover the reservoirs?
Well, in the mid-1970s, they said don't build any new uncovered reservoirs because it's really inconsistent with public health protection, drinking water quality, to treat water and then put it into open reservoirs in an urban environment. And, okay.
So the mid-70s, they said you started building reservoirs with covers on them.
Right.
And
there was actually a plan in the mid-1970s to put a cover on Lincoln and Volunteer reservoirs that are up in Capitol Hill area. Bonds were even sold to cover both of those reservoirs, and there was kind of pushback from council and some other constituencies saying, you know, this seems to be too costly, and is there really a benefit in doing that? And the program was put aside, you know, really unfortunately. There were substantial improvements in the protection program associated with open reservoirs. They were put in place at that time to make sure that we were protecting them as best they could, even though they were uncovered. And that program has been improved upon over the last 20, 25 years.
okay. Actually, well, just so I have an idea, I mean, what is it? I mean, just give me an average cost for a cover for a reservoir these days.
Well, there are two different kinds of covers that are being considered. One is a structural concrete cover, where the reservoir is actually buried under the ground, and those are quite expensive and can cost, well, I don't want to be
guesstimate's
throwing
fine.
out. They can cost in the neighborhood of $1 per gallon of storage, and so it's quite expensive. And you know, because there's a lot of construction that's involved, and it's concrete work, and you're excavating a large area and burying it. This is about 60 million gallons.
Okay. So yeah, pretty expensive little. The concrete one certainly would be expensive. Now the covers though, the
Floating
covers. Get an idea with how much would in a complete sentence, how much would floating covers cost roughly?
They can cost 5 to 10 times less than a structural concrete buried reservoir, and it's very quick. I mean, it's a much faster process to get them installed.
So since September 11th, there has been, what's happened since September 11th? Why don't you just tell it for me from the SPU side of things?
Well, we've had a security program in place prior to September 11th, but you know, the world has changed for us and other public agencies, private companies, and we are looking at a variety of improvements we need to make. The most visible is looking at accelerating the reservoir covering program. Councilmember Margaret Pagler has asked SPU to take a look at options, what the schedule will look like, what the financial impacts are, and we're going to be reporting to her on October 23rd.
Okay. And what are you, since we will have footage from the 23rd meeting, but what do you think is going to be discussed, and what are you going to be telling the City Council? What are some of the things what can SPU do to accelerate, and what can't they do?
We are looking at, well, we're just pretty much looking at how fast we can get these all covered, and looking at, we can't take all of them out of service at the same time because they are providing water to the regional system, and so looking at how many we can take out of service at a given time, what are the options for designing and constructing, I mean the
Go ahead and keep talking. I mean, I'm just going to listen to it, and then I'll have you repeat it, though.
okay. The approaches for managing the project, and then again the rate impacts. What does it mean from a financial standpoint, and impact to ratepayers to accelerate the program?
I know I always break it down into simplifications, but originally you were talking, 25-year program, maybe 2018, 2019. Now, I mean, have you looked at a feasibility study to try to figure out if it could be years sooner than that? Any idea?
It is likely to be much sooner than that. I mean, in the neighborhood of 2005 to 2007, that they would all be done. I mean, that's one of the very accelerated options.
We're just one more time. The with an accelerated schedule, when would it be that Seattle's reservoirs might, in fact, all be covered?
Over the next 4 to 5 years. That's one of the options that we're going to be presenting to Council Member Pagler and her committee.
And is it going to, that accelerated cost, I mean, with that accelerated schedule, probably there are accelerated costs, and I'll ask you that question in a second.
And I don't have the cost numbers off the...
No problem. Yeah, no kidding. Obviously, it was going to be stretched out over 25 years for payment. I mean, how you guys, do you know how, I mean, is that pretty much on the council side to try to figure out how to pay for that kind of acceleration?
There'll be some cost information that's provided to them, and then it would be up to council to decide, how best to address the financial impacts.
Let's get into this a little bit. How do you put a cover on a reservoir? I mean, what's the process and how long does it take?
Well, for floating covers, it can take, once you've got a contractor selected, anywhere from 6 to 9 months.
And what is it exactly? I mean, what's this? I mean, it's a heavy material that floats? I mean, just to give the average person an idea.
Yeah, it's a heavy. I don't want to.
Okay.
An example to make sure that
okay.
Once you open the hatch that you don't sink. But
what happens to the rain? How does the rain get?
There's a drainage system on the top, and a way to take up the slack in the material. And it's there's a liner material that's put down on the bottom, and then this very strong.
We'll make it work.
Yeah, I mean.
Plastic.
No, I wouldn't
Okay.
say plastic. I just say
Okay.
a sturdy material.
We're going to quickly do this because we've got
Okay.
one quick second before planes know. Okay. So how is this? I mean, so explain the floating cover. Explain roughly how it works.
Well, there's a very sturdy material that is put on the bottom to prevent leakage out of the reservoir, and is put across the top also. It's completely sealed, completely secure, and there are mechanisms to take any water that rainwater on the top and drain it off to the side. No open surface to the atmosphere, completely covered.
Okay. Now that we've gotten to that just a little bit, it might be worth our while to quickly check in on, you said there's been a security program prior to September 11th. What has, just for people's peace of mind, what has SPU done to step up security, especially in relation to reservoirs?
We're not getting into any specifics around that, but there are components related to...
Let's do this. Let's do this. One of these things. Why don't you tell me why you're not going to get into specifics, because I think that's important. Because people, because obviously a compromise around that, just to give an idea, just to let us know that things have taken place or something along those lines. Yeah. Okay. So security in general regarding reservoirs. What's SPU done like prior to September 11th?
Well, we had a comprehensive program prior to September 11th around prevention and deterrence, detection of any intrusion, and then emergency response to any kind of emergency related to security that would happen. Since
Sorry, this is just driving me nuts.
We're going to have to go for the tail end.
Yeah, okay,
One way
like
or
now.
that you might, and
Do
especially.
that and answer it comfortably. Okay. One more time, security measures. So you've done a number of different ones. Why don't you go into a little bit about, now you can't specifically tell me that much about security measures, correct?
Yes, I mean, it would obviously compromise security if we talked about any specifics.
But what in general has, I mean, so is the cover, why don't you tell me, I mean, does the cover relate to other, hang on, do we have this guy driving through? Okay. So why don't you talk about the cover as it relates to other layers of security that SPU has undertaken?
Well, it would be just one more measure that would be added to our security program. And we build the security program around prevention and deterrence.
Okay.
My coach.
It's fine.
If you could just come here to your, you can just lean to your left. Yeah, that's good. Okay, we're rolling.
Okay. Security measures that SPU has taken, General. What are some of those?
Well, reservoir covers, which we're talking about here, would be one more layer of security that we would be applying to the system and security program that we already have in place. Security program is around prevention and deterrence of any kind of security breach, detection of any kind of security issue, and then response to anything that may occur out there. And that program is very comprehensive, multi-layer. It includes things like fences, which you see in the background here, closed-circuit TV, human surveillance, and some other things that we don't get into a whole lot of detail around. We are working very closely with law enforcement agencies here locally, and they've got ties to federal law enforcement folks. We're working with public health people in Department of Health and King County, and just trying to apply best practices out there that others have learned too in terms of improving security.
Okay, and just get some quick stats. Number of covers. I mean, how many of the reservoirs currently now are in fact covered in the Seattle area?
Let me.
Is that a tough question?
Well, we've got a whole bunch of tanks and standpipes and other kinds of elevated structures, and I just need to go through.
How many reservoirs exist in Seattle? When I say reservoirs, I mean kind of a situation like this.
Are we doing just in Seattle again? Are you going to confuse me with my?
We have reservoirs outside Seattle. You're just interested in the city limits, right?
What's Margaret interested in?
City.
I guess it would be whatever Margaret's interested in.
I would stick to in town, Dave. It makes it
All right,
simpler.
heck with it. Let's stick to the city limits.
Okay,
This is
all
a
right.
TBC
All right.
anyway, so
That's
heck
right.
with it. What? No, I didn't mean that. I meant TBC is for only people within the limits. Well, as soon as we have a second. Okay.
Okay.
So, reservoirs that are covered, reservoirs that aren't uncovered. Can you tell me just a few of the numbers as they pertain to the city of Seattle?
Within the city right now, we've got 9 uncovered reservoirs. Bitter Lake, which was uncovered, is in the process of being covered right now, and so it's out of service. When it goes back in service, it's going to be a covered reservoir. In addition to that, we've got 3 existing covered reservoirs.
So, as of in the next few months, we'll have 4 total. How many covered reservoirs total?
4 within the city.
Okay, great. I think we're. So, let's see. Since in '94, now something happened significantly in '94. Is that when the health department came out?
Yeah, they revised their regulations and they said, we know that you're not building any new uncovered reservoirs, but we want a specific plan from you, even though we know it's going to take you a little while. A specific plan for covering all the ones that you've got uncovered at this point. So,
Are there any completely contained concrete reservoirs in the city of Seattle?
yes.
Which one is that?
There's one over in Magnolia, which is used to be an uncovered reservoir, and now it's a coverage. And I think I probably misspoke because the third one I was thinking about is just north of SeaTac Airport. It's called Riverton Heights Reservoir.
Okay, so those are the 3, and then Bitter Lake would be the addition.
Yeah.
Okay, it's still pretty close. Okay, and was the Magnolia Reservoir completely torn out, and
Yes.
then
Completely
start
reconstructed.
all over?
But a single long outage in a multi-unit system like Skagit wouldn't knock you out of the box. What knocks you out of the box is a higher than average forced outage rate. And really what it says is the area emphasis relative to the group that you need to be looking at really for Skagit, and somewhat for Boundary, because Boundary was just mediocre, was how do you get that reliability up? Well, we know there's two parts to the reliability. There's an investment part and there's a maintenance part. I'm going to talk to the investment part here in a minute. But for the maintenance part, we really are talking about the same thing for both. I mean, certainly, again, I'm going to talk about the combined skilling, and not because it's a cost issue, because cost-wise, you guys are really, really cheap. In fact, you ought to be looking at maybe how do we add some cost back in and move up that curve a little bit. I mean, the best of all worlds would be is if you could keep your costs down that low and just get your reliability up. One of the things that tends to come along with multi-skilling that we've seen as a best practice is the idea that there's not a lot of handoffs between different crafts and skills. The idea of ownership of the equipment. We're going to talk a bit about self-directed work teams this afternoon. That's on the agenda. But one of the ideas that seems to come hand in hand in the smaller and medium plants with the ideas of self-sufficient crews, whether it's mechanical and electrical people together on the same crew or individual people who can do both, is the idea that if I don't fix it, it's not going to get fixed. It's not to be handed off to the next crew or the next shift or the next craft or the next thing. That when you multi-skill, one of the things that seems to come hand in hand in terms of a best practice or a good practice is the ownership that you get along with that. That's not saying there's not ownership now at the Skagit, but that kind of concept is very reinforcing, you know, as well as being low cost. More important than that, and it took up more space, but I do want to talk about the issue here. It looks to me like, you know, issues you ought to be looking at to get more bang for your buck in terms of reliability is as you add people at the boundary, as you crank your resource levels up following investment, and likewise for the Skagit, you've got to be looking at some more sophisticated marshaling of information to try to get to the root causes of your outages. I mean, that's, without getting any more involved in the details than that, that's an area that looks like it could be productive for you, because in plant maintenance, it's not a cost issue, it's a reliability issue. Now, there's also an investment component to that, and I want to talk to that. You know, investments being addressed at the boundary, but I think there's an investment component at the Skagit too. Skagit's investment is about average for its age of group. And that's kind of tipping, but I'll go ahead I'll jump right ahead to the investment. If you look at investment, here's the 5-year spending pattern. This one's not a performance score like the other one said. Skagit was the lowest among all its peers. I mean, lowest by a bunch. No, I'm sorry, Boundary was. Boundary was the lowest. That's no surprise. Now, that's going to change as you invest in it. But Skagit was average for the group. The investment pattern. You were right, you were dead on what the 5-year average was for the group. But that belies something about your investment pattern itself. Fully a third of your investment at the Skagit over the last 5 years has not been in the category of generating equipment. It's been in the category of public affairs and regulatory. And in fact, you were the third highest spender of public affairs and regulatory investment behind Chelan. And Chelan is the poster child for spending too much on fish. You know, they're the poster child in the industry about being overinvested in public affairs and regulatory, and the Skagit is just behind them. So while your investment is average for the Skagit, it's probably underinvested relative to the 41 to 65-year-old age group, because so much of the investment went related to your public affairs and regulatory, and I think that has to rhyme with getting your licenses, doesn't it? Isn't that what was directing it there, is getting your licenses? So for reliability, I think there's two parts to the answer. You know, focusing your resources to make sure you're, in the maintenance end of the world, fixing the things that are breaking. But I think this benchmarking really poses the question, are we underinvested in generating equipment? And the report goes into this in detail about the investment profiles of where people are putting their money. But, you know, relative to your 41 to 65-year-old age group, you are underinvested in your generating equipment and systems relative to your peers in that same group because so much of your investment got directed to public affairs and regulatory. So if you've got a long, you know, potential capital projects list there relative to your generating systems or relative to chronic problems there, that probably is in sync with what you're seeing in terms of your reliability results for these units.
Well, we have the records for the causes of the forced outages, don't we, Maureen? The GADS did.
Yeah.
We have all that. So that's
One of the very best practices that we've seen in this, and you might have missed this at the workshop, because I think TVA spoke to